Hey guys, tonight we begin with the rather tangled lives of the most inbred women in medieval history. The candles flicker across heavy stone walls. Your silk nightgown itches a little, though you won't say anything. Somewhere in the castle, a falcon screeches, but no one moves. Because this is just another royal evening, where your husband is also your cousin, your uncle, and maybe even your future son-in-law. You're a duchess, a queen, a pawn, and, statistically speaking, probably related to yourself. You were born in velvet and baptized in politics. And if you thought a family reunion was awkward, wait until it ends in a wedding. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fun to see who else is wandering the royal corridors at midnight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not here for romance. You're here for dynastic math. You're born to one Ferdinand and one Isabella, names every schoolchild knows. But what they don't teach is that these Catholic monarchs were not only married but also second cousins. Welcome to Spain, 1479. You are Joanna, your mind, a battlefield of grief, rage, and royal expectation. The court smells of incense and upholstery. And fear. Because when your gene pool looks like a kiddie pool, things start to get complicated. You grow up in a world where the word uncle means at least 3 different people, and someone hands you a marriage contract before you get your first tooth. Historians still argue whether royal inbreeding was truly understood as a danger back then or just a divine convenience. After all, if God made you royal, wouldn't your genes be above the rules? And tonight, those rules are slipping. You're not alone in your candlelit misery. In Castile, the marriage bed is an extension of the war room. And nothing keeps territory in the family like literally keeping the family, in the family. A quirky little side note, the Habsburgs, your extended kin, eventually became so inbred that one of them couldn't close his jaw. You're still decades from that, but the warning signs are already strolling the corridors. In this life, your beauty is less important than your ancestry chart. The closer the blood, the better the claim. So they marry you to someone you've been calling T.O. since you were 6. Is that awkward? Yes. Is it negotiable? Absolutely not. You learn early that emotions are a luxury for peasants. You sit straight. You nod politely. You make alliances with your uterus. You might be 12. Or 13. Maybe 14 if your handlers are feeling generous. The age doesn't matter. The bloodline does. A royal daughter has 3 jobs: marry well, bear heirs, and never outshine the men. Easy, right? Until your emotions get the better of you. You cry. You scream. You mourn your cheating husband too loudly. And suddenly, you're mad. Not sad, or hurt, or rightfully upset, just mad. Joanna of Castile, your first real friend in this cursed lineage, didn't just grieve. She followed her husband's coffin through the Spanish countryside like a sleepwalker. She refused to bury him. Historians still debate whether this was mental illness, or just the last gasp of a woman who'd had her sanity slowly dissolved in political acid. As you wander the stone halls, you realize marriage here is more like a merger. Your father isn't worried about your happiness. He's worried about the French border. Your uncle sees your smile and thinks, potential alliance. Your aunt sends you a necklace that belonged to your cousin/half-sister. It's all perfectly normal. In a medieval nightmare. You overhear nobles whispering. Too much Castile in her blood, they say. Too much mother in her mind. But you pretend not to hear. You always pretend. The gowns are heavy. The prayers are long. And the men are always planning, wars, treaties, weddings. Sometimes all three happen in the same month. And you're the dotted line on a treaty that says, marry this one so we can invade that one. There's no such thing as a love match. Not for women like you. Every bedroom is a chessboard. Every cradle, a contingency plan. Every son, a spare claim. The moon rises over your family's ancestral keep. Bats chatter somewhere in the eaves. You sigh, not because you're tired, but because someone else just decided who you'll be sleeping next to for the next 20 years. You lie down on a feather-stuffed mattress and stare at the ceiling. Tomorrow, they'll send word to the Austrian court. Or maybe to Portugal. Someone has a third cousin who needs a queen. And you're the most desirable woman in Europe. Because your family tree is twisted in just the right places. You wake up with a stiff neck and the weight of history pressing down on your ribcage, figuratively and literally. The corset is tighter today. Maybe it's because the court physician swore it helps with posture. Maybe it's because no one wants you to breathe too deeply around the mess they've made of your life. Your name is still Joanna of Castile, though soon they'll call you Joanna the Mad. That's what history remembers you for. Not your intelligence. Not your politics. Just your madness. But the real madness is what's happening around you, not inside you. You remember your wedding day. Your husband was Philip the Handsome, which, frankly, was a bit generous. Yes, he had good cheekbones. But he also had mistresses, and opinions about your usefulness that shrank by the year. Still, he was your match, politically. The son of a holy Roman emperor, carrying enough noble blood to make a genealogist weep with joy. And yes, he was also your second cousin. The wedding had all the expected trimmings, velvet, incense, Latin chants, nervous glances from your ladies-in-waiting. And the smell of something burning, roast lamb or a long-forgotten moral boundary. Historians still argue whether you actually lost your mind, or if your breakdown was simply the result of overmedication, undercompassion, and repeated emotional sabotage. After all, you were young, in love, and rapidly being gaslit by an entire royal apparatus. Who wouldn't unravel a little? You tried to trust Philip. You did. But he slept with everything that moved and undermined you in court, treating your authority like it was optional. And every time you protested, he called you emotional. Hysterical. Mad. And just like that, the diagnosis stuck. You were grieving. Deeply. But no one dared call it that. Because grief in a royal woman was dangerous. It meant you still had feelings, still had agency. So they locked you away and said you were unwell. Politically inconvenient. It was easier that way. They say you refused to bury his body. That you carried his coffin across Castile, opening the lid to check that no other woman had stolen his beauty even in death. That may be dramatic embellishment, or it may be the most honest expression of powerlessness the medieval world had ever seen. The castle you're confined in is damp. Cold. Echoey. You hear your thoughts louder than you hear the guards. You pace. You write letters. You talk to people who aren't in the room, because the people in the room aren't really listening. One fringe theory whispers that you were never mentally ill at all. Just too smart, too aware of your rights, and too emotional in a system that punished all three. And when your father Ferdinand wanted control, it was much easier to declare you unstable than to let you rule. You watch your children grow up through whispers and paintings. One of them is Charles V, future emperor and headache-in-chief to half of Europe. He inherits your jawline, and your political instincts. But he learns early not to trust anyone who cries. Time passes slowly when you're labeled mad. The hours bend. The days flatten. The seasons blur. You ask the servants for news, and they smile kindly and lie. Your world becomes one long corridor and a memory of sunlight. Meanwhile, your name is passed around Europe like an excuse. Joanna the Mad, they say. Can't trust her. Can't let her rule. She's too fragile. Too erratic. Too haunted. All while the men in your life make bigger, bolder, and far more foolish decisions, and no one sends them to a convent. Sometimes, you think of your mother, Queen Isabella, who once ruled all of Spain with a prayer book in one hand and a sword in the other. She financed Columbus. She drove the Moors out of Granada. She changed the course of world history. But she also married her cousin and made you, genetically fragile and emotionally saturated. It's hard to be the product of ambition and closeness. Your blood is a feedback loop. Royal, divine, and increasingly unstable. It's like someone kept photocopying a face until all that was left was a blur of cheekbones and anxiety. One afternoon, you see a bird outside your window. A raven, maybe. Or a crow. Something ominous and proud. You stare at it too long and a servant reports it. She's talking to birds again, they whisper. You weren't. But even if you were, who else is there? They say your madness was hereditary. Passed through the blood like a stubborn heirloom. But maybe it wasn't madness. Maybe it was the logical reaction to a life spent being owned, judged, traded, and ignored. Joanna of Castile. Queen. Mother. Ghost. You remain in that fortress for decades. You outlive your husband, your father, your enemies. And still, no one dares let you rule. In your quieter moments, you wonder what your legacy will be. Will they remember your intelligence? Your strength? Your pain? Probably not. They'll remember the coffin. The crying. The whispers. They'll remember the madness, because it was easier than remembering the woman. You wake again, not in Castile now, but in the velvet-draped cradle of imperial Europe, surrounded by gold-framed portraits of people who look suspiciously like each other. Their eyes, their chins, their posture. It's almost like the same few people keep getting recycled, rearranged, and recrowned. That's because you're now Isabella of Habsburg, born in 1501, daughter of Philip the Handsome and Joanna of Castile, yes, that Joanna, the one you just met who may or may not have been mad. So, congratulations, your mother may be locked in a convent, and your father was arguably more cheekbone than conscience, but at least your pedigree is elite. You stretch your fingers out in the cold morning light and somewhere far off, a chambermaid curtsies. Your bloodline reads like a European royal directory. Your brother is Charles V, future Holy Roman Emperor. Your aunts and uncles rule Portugal, Burgundy, Spain, maybe even parts of Italy if the paperwork clears. Your family reunions require translators, military escorts, and a map of papal allegiances. The Habsburg family motto might as well be, if you can't conquer them, marry them. Then conquer them anyway. And you? You're the product of that strategy. Your DNA is a masterwork of repetition. Your face is a familiar mirror, your blood already pledged to half of Europe. It's not so much heritage as it is strategic recycling. Historians still argue whether the Habsburgs truly understood how inbreeding worked, or whether they just hoped that if they stayed Catholic enough, the gene pool would self-correct. Spoiler, it didn't. You marry young, of course. The groom is Manuel I of Portugal, a man who is both much older than you and also your first cousin once removed. In the royal matchmaking world, this is basically the equivalent of marrying your upstairs neighbor, but with more Latin. The wedding is grand, the marriage less so. You produce children like you're on deadline. Too quickly. But then tragedy. Manuel dies. You're widowed before 30. Widowed and royal, which means your freedom lasts about as long as a candle at court. The solution? Obvious. Marry again. To Francis I of France, a man your brother once kept prisoner. Because what's a little political kidnapping between in-laws? You get on a ship. You travel. You perform the ritual. You change your signature again. It's all very ceremonial and deeply exhausting. Your new husband is charming, dashing, and profoundly interested in everyone except you. It's not personal. It's just monarchy. Still, you smile through banquets. You curtsy through boredom. You give birth through discomfort. You are a queen twice over, a pawn 1,000 times. The gossip whispers around your name like incense. Too much Joanna in her. Poor girl, she takes after her mother. At least she's fertile. They don't mention your education. Or your knowledge of theology, law, and diplomacy. They mention your waistline, your fertility, and your increasingly Habsburg jaw. A quirky little tidbit: by the time your children are old enough to start their own dynastic adventures, the family trees are so entangled that some wedding planners resort to heraldic flowcharts just to avoid complete genetic collapse. You feel it, sometimes. The loopiness. The double helix doing the medieval waltz. A sense that maybe you've met this life before. That your husband reminds you of someone, not just your cousin, but your other cousin. And your uncle. And, weirdly, your grandmother. But you don't complain. Because complaint isn't royal. Poise is. Your life is a procession of obligations. Court functions, public devotions, private losses. You mourn in silence. You reign in metaphor. You age in portraits. And your children? They are brilliant. Beautiful. Slightly cross-eyed, but who's counting? Historians still debate whether your generation marked the beginning of true Habsburg decline or just the point when they started looking like their own coat of arms. The difference is subtle. But you feel it. The bone-deep exhaustion of being born into repetition. Sometimes, in the quiet of your chamber, you press your fingers to your temples and try to remember a world without ceremony. Without cousin weddings. Without the pressure of being both holy and Roman and imperial, sometimes all before breakfast. You dream of gardens. Of long, winding corridors that lead nowhere. Of faces that look like yours, speaking languages you don't quite understand. But the dreams always end the same way: a ringing bell, a new alliance, another ceremony. Your portrait hangs in 3 different royal courts. Each one shows you smiling faintly. No one paints the jaw tension. Or the migraine. Or the private thought that maybe, just maybe, your mother wasn't mad, just tired of all this. You don't live long. Few do in this world. But your children live. And your bloodline spreads like ivy, beautiful, tangled, impossible to root out. Isabella of Habsburg. Daughter of the mad mother of the future. You were born into a loop. You did your duty. You married the plan. And Europe never looked the same again. You open your eyes now in a damp English dawn, the sky overcast like someone spilled tea across the clouds. The palace smells faintly of wet wool, ink, and regret. You are Catherine of Aragon, and if your life had a subtitle, it might read, 2 brothers, 1 crown, and 0 choices. You've already seen enough dynastic knots to make a medieval wedding chart look like a bowl of linguine, but this one's personal. Because you didn't just marry into the English monarchy once. You married it twice. Your first husband was Arthur, Prince of Wales, the carefully groomed heir of the Tudor dynasty. He was also your cousin. Not a surprise. You came from Spain, after all, where the crown was practically its own sibling. Arthur wasn't exactly a firecracker. Frail, reserved, reportedly fond of books more than bridal beds. Your marriage lasted about 5 months before he died, leaving you a teenage widow in a foreign land, with no dowry returned, no future promised, and no idea what would come next. Historians still argue whether your first marriage was ever consummated. Which is a polite historical way of asking if anything, happened, on the wedding night. You've said no. His family has said maybe. But in Tudor politics, that one night would define the rest of your life. Because after Arthur died, England didn't want to give up your Spanish alliance. So what did they do? They passed you along to his younger brother. Henry. Yes. That Henry. Henry VIII. Tall, charismatic, athletic, at least in his youth. You knew him when his waist was smaller than his ego. You were 5 years older, better educated, more poised, and, at least early on, he adored you. He called you his beloved queen. You gave him international clout, royal babies, and prestige. But not a surviving son. That's when things started to sour. Slowly at first. Like fruit left out just a little too long. You buried children. One after the other. Some were stillborn. Some lived only weeks. Only Mary, your daughter, survived. But a daughter wasn't enough for a king who wanted a male heir and an excuse. Henry started looking elsewhere. He found Anne Boleyn, who was younger, flirtier, and, more importantly, not his brother's widow. Henry wanted a divorce. The Pope refused. So Henry did what Henry always did when someone told him no, he started a church. The Church of England was born partly because your marriage was inconvenient. A quirky fact here, Henry's argument for annulment rested on a verse in Leviticus about marrying a brother's wife bringing childlessness. Conveniently, he forgot the other part of the Bible that required such a marriage in certain cases. You, of course, refused to go quietly. You were a queen. You were the daughter of Isabella and Ferdinand. You weren't about to let some second marriage to a man you once helped raise ruin your honor. They stripped your titles. Banished you from court. But you held fast. You signed letters, Catherine the Queen, until the day you died. You believed your marriage was lawful, your daughter was legitimate, and your memory would outlast Henry's whims. Historians still debate what you felt during those final years, whether you held out hope or simply held on to dignity. Whether you wept in private or drew strength from fury. You weren't just a wife. You were a symbol. Of piety, of defiance, of what it meant to be royal and not bend. Let's not forget your education. Fluent in Latin. Schooled in theology and diplomacy. You ran Henry's court while he was off jousting. You led England during his war campaigns. Once, when a Scottish army invaded, you ordered one of your generals to send you the dead king's bloody coat. Which he did. And you displayed it like a warning. But no matter what you did, it always came back to your womb. A fertile woman was a valuable woman. An infertile queen. Disposable. You aged. Henry's eyes wandered. And so did his priorities. And Boleyn was pregnant. He needed you gone. So he claimed you lied. That you had known Arthur, as a wife knows her husband. You swore it wasn't true. You swore it to God. And maybe that's the only person you thought would listen. Your daughter, Mary, would later become Queen of England. But not before being declared illegitimate, exiled, and emotionally bludgeoned by the court that was once yours. You died in a cold castle in Cambridgeshire. Not as queen. Not even as dowager princess. Just Catherine. Yet your funeral was fit for a queen, whether Henry admitted it or not. People wore mourning black. Spanish diplomats wept. You left this world as you lived in it, underestimated, outmaneuvered, but never undone. And as for Henry, well, you were the first of 6. You set the standard. A wife so devoted, so principled, that she haunted his politics long after he married other women, divorced others, beheaded others. 2 brothers. 1 crown. 1 woman who refused to be erased. Your legacy wasn't in a son. It was in your spine. You're in the Low Countries now, where the skies hang low and the politics hang even lower. The air smells of damp stone, parchment, and the faint singe of betrayal. Your name is Margaret of Austria, though no one ever really gets to call you just that. You are always someone's daughter, someone's widow, someone's aunt, or someone's governor. You were born into chaos. Your father, Maximilian of Austria, a future Holy Roman Emperor, married Mary of Burgundy, the only child of Charles the Bold. And when Charles conveniently died in battle, right on schedule, your mother was suddenly the heiress to one of Europe's richest, most fragile duchies. Historians still argue whether Mary ever wanted that kind of power. But no one asks her. She dies when you're just a little girl. And so, once again, power is orphaned, and you are wrapped in a tapestry of alliances, debts, and noble expectations. As a toddler, you're betrothed to the French Dauphin, shipped off to France to be raised as a future queen. You learn French. You smile in French. You sign your name in a looped, almost apologetic French script. And then, like a bad punchline, they break the engagement. Politics. Always politics. So you're returned to your family, now technically damaged goods. But you're young, female, and breathtakingly well-connected. Which means you're still highly marriageable. Next up, Juan, Prince of Asturias, son of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. Yes, those 2 again. Your cousin. Naturally. You marry him in a splashy ceremony with far too many candles and far too few personal boundaries. He dies months later. Illness, they say. Or maybe just bad genes. At 20, you're already widowed twice. Which, for a woman in medieval Europe, is either a tragedy or a promotion. In your case, both. Here's a quirky little footnote: you're one of the only royal women of your generation who says no to a 3rd marriage. Flat out. Politely. Permanently. You take your widow's gowns, your political savvy, and your unmatched grasp of court intrigue, and you retire from marriage entirely. Instead, you dedicate yourself to governance, diplomacy, and making sure your idiot relatives don't burn the entire continent down. Your nephew, Charles V, appoints you governor of the Netherlands, a job that makes ruling England look like babysitting a sandbox. The Dutch provinces are prickly, proud, and constantly in revolt. But you manage them with a cocktail of diplomacy, bribery, and steely-eyed charm. They underestimate you. Of course they do. You're a woman. You wear lace. You have a library. You commission tapestries and paintings. But then you go and crush rebellions, negotiate treaties, and run state finances with more precision than any duke in your council. Historians still debate whether you ruled with compassion or calculation. The answer is yes. You played both sides of every coin and somehow kept it spinning. You knew when to send flowers, and when to send troops. At night, you walk the gardens of Mechelen, where the hedges are clipped into strange and regal shapes. You read Seneca. You write letters. You sip wine and silently consider which of your nephews will ruin everything you've built. Your court becomes a hub for artists, scholars, ambassadors, and spies. You speak multiple languages. You keep a music chamber and a war room, often side by side. And when your cousin Ferdinand tries to muscle into your policies, you remind him, in no uncertain terms, that this patch of Europe is yours. One of your proudest accomplishments. Raising the next generation. Not just your nieces and nephews but their minds. You make sure Charles learns statecraft. That his brother Ferdinand understands diplomacy. That your nieces read history and understand power. You're not raising brides. You're building queens. Of course, it isn't easy. You're surrounded by men with swords and short attention spans. You outmaneuver them quietly, one well-phrased dispatch at a time. One eyebrow raised over a goblet of watered wine. You don't remarry. That part's crucial. You could have. Easily. Nobles offered. Kings hinted. But you saw the pattern. You weren't about to be another name in a ledger, another dowry shuffled across borders. Your life isn't romantic. It's legendary. There's a strange dignity in being alone at court. You're watched constantly. Yet underestimated. It gives you room to work. To outplay them all. And when Charles becomes emperor, it's partly because of you, your guidance, your tutoring, your ruthless sense of when to cut ties and when to double down. One final quirky bit, you kept a small portrait of your first fiancé, the French Dauphin, until your death. The boy you never married. The life that never was. People say you looked at it often, with something that wasn't quite regret, but wasn't quite indifference either. In your final days, the provinces are quiet. For once. The gardens bloom. You've left the Netherlands richer, smarter, and more secure than they were when you arrived. And when the bells toll for you, they ring not just for a regent or a widow, but for a ruler who never needed a crown to hold power. Margaret of Austria. Twice widowed. Never outplayed. You wake now in a stone tower high above the misty mountains of northern Spain. The air is cold, stiff with incense and old prayers. The walls are lined with tapestries that try their best to look regal, but there's only so much majesty you can wring from damp wool. You are Blanche of Castile, and if that sounds familiar, it should, because your family tree has already made several guest appearances tonight. Your bloodline is a cocktail of English, French, and Castilian royalty, shaken, stirred, and served repeatedly across generations. If aristocratic DNA had a warning label, yours would read, "Handle with care, contents under dynastic pressure." Born in 1188, you're the granddaughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine, yes, that Eleanor, and the daughter of Alfonso VIII of Castile and Eleanor of England, herself a daughter of Henry II and sister to Richard the Lionheart. Which means your pedigree includes crusaders, conquerors, and more squabbling siblings than a Netflix royal drama. But you're not raised to be just a symbol. You're educated, devout, politically literate, and, of course, betrothed before you can spell it. At 12 years old, you're sent to France to marry Louis, the future Louis VIII. You arrive with a dowry large enough to fund a small army, and a bridal entourage so long it reportedly took an hour just to unpack your trunks. And while the marriage begins as most do, awkwardly and with too many bishops, something strange happens. You thrive. Historians still argue whether it was love or strategy, but either way, you become not just queen consort, but the brains behind the operation. While Louis is off invading England, unsuccessfully, mind you, you're managing the court, mediating land disputes, and making sure your children don't grow up to marry their cousins. Well, fewer cousins. And when Louis dies in 1226, you're suddenly a widow. With a throne. And a 12-year-old son, the future Louis IX, to raise and protect. The nobles circle like sharks. The regency should go to a man, they argue. Someone with armor and a beard. You smile. You nod. And then you take over everything. This is your moment. You don't rule from the shadows. You rule from the front. You put down baronial rebellions. You negotiate with England. You keep the treasury afloat and the papacy on your side. You are the beating heart of French governance for over a decade. One quirky note, you once disguised yourself in a cloak and personally led a nighttime escape from besieging nobles to rally loyal forces. Because nothing says, gentle widow, like sneaking through enemy lines to retake your son's birthright. You keep your son, Louis IX, not just alive but prepared. Under your tutelage, he becomes not only king but saint, literally. Saint Louis, the Crusader king. The one they name entire cities after. He credits his piety and strength to you. You taught him to pray, to rule, and to think of the throne as more than just an inheritance, it's a responsibility. A divine burden. Historians still debate just how much influence you had over his religious zeal. Was it your unwavering Catholicism that planted the seed? Or was Louis simply mimicking the one person in his life who never bent, never broke? Either way, you are the regent who didn't just survive court politics, you commanded them. You weren't a placeholder. You were the blueprint. And not just in war rooms. You're a patron of architecture, art, and law. You commission abbeys. You write letters that shape papal policy. You advocate for the poor while maintaining a silk-heavy wardrobe that weighs more than some bishops. In your later years, you even accompany Louis on his crusades, not to the battlefield, but as part of the logistical apparatus that kept the war machine moving. You handle the shipments, the provisions, the letters. You are the head behind the holy war, even if no one officially says so. And when the crown is finally secure, when the nobles are silenced, the church appeased, and your son fully in power, you don't vanish. You retreat to a monastery, but not for peace. For planning. You keep advising until your last breath. Your hands never truly leave the reins. One charming little rumor that persisted long after your death, that you had a hidden ledger of every noble who crossed you, every bribe they offered, every scandal they buried. No one's ever found it. But the mere idea terrified French nobility for generations. You die in 1252, worn but undefeated. Buried not just as queen, but as architect of a dynasty. You were the bridge between Eleanor of Aquitaine and St. Louis. Between fire and faith. And your legacy? It's not in poems or gilded shrines. It's in how France became France. Blanche of Castile. Regent. Strategist. Lioness in a cloak. You taught Europe that a woman with a crown and a cause is more dangerous than any sword. You open your eyes now beneath a cold Bohemian sky, the kind that seems stitched together from pewter and prophecy. The stones under your feet are slick with mountain rain, and somewhere nearby, a bell tolls like a warning. You are Anne of Bohemia and Hungary, and if your life feels like a chessboard, that's because you've been a queen and a pawn in equal measure. Born in 1503, you arrive in this world already tangled in dynasties. Your father is Vladislaus II, King of Hungary and Bohemia, and your mother is Anne of Foicandau, a French noblewoman with enough Valois blood to make you vaguely interesting to half of Europe. And yet, your birth is more than just a happy royal announcement. It is an international strategy memo wrapped in lace. You're part of a long-running negotiation between the Habsburgs, the Hungarian crown, and everyone who's ever tried to stop the Ottoman Empire from crashing the party. Historians still argue whether your father ever truly ruled or just held the title while the kingdom ran itself. Either way, you grow up under pressure, not from enemies, but from family. Especially that famous family, the Habsburgs. You know them well. You are one. At least a little. You're betrothed at a young age to Ferdinand of Austria, your double first cousin. Yes, you heard that right. You share all four grandparents. That's not a family tree, it's a wreath. The marriage is purely political, designed to merge Austrian and Hungarian claims, strengthen Habsburg control in Central Europe, and hopefully produce more heirs with teeth that close properly. But when you finally meet Ferdinand, it's not terrible. He's not a brute. He listens when you speak. He values your opinion, especially during the endless series of border skirmishes, noble revolts, and awkward dinners with overambitious bishops. And that makes you rare. Not just a royal consort, but a partner. You ride beside him. You advise him. You write letters that steer the Habsburg machine like a ship through fog. A quirky historical tidbit, Ferdinand once sent you love poems. Actual verse. In Latin. Some historians think he wrote them himself. Others suspect a court poet. Either way, they were surprisingly competent, though perhaps not enough to distract from the whole "we share too many chromosomes" thing. Your marriage produces 15 children. Yes. 15. You are a one-woman dynastic expansion pack. Among those children, Maximilian II, future Holy Roman Emperor. Anna, who marries Philip II of Spain. Your womb becomes the pan-European freight train for royal legitimacy. But you are more than a mother. You are also Queen of Hungary and Bohemia, titles you hold not just ceremonially, but functionally. When Ferdinand is off dealing with the Holy Roman mess, you run the domestic sphere. You negotiate alliances, organize court festivities, and, perhaps most importantly, keep the local nobility loyal. That's no small task. The Hungarian nobles are famously unruly. Bohemian politics are a circus with swords. But you manage it. Gracefully. Silently. Like someone who knows the power of quiet efficiency. Historians still debate whether you held real political power or just whispered well-timed advice. The answer? Both. You didn't need a throne to rule. You just needed a moment, and you knew exactly when to take it. There's something steady about you. something ironed into the seams of your gown. While wars rage around you and relatives chase thrones like children after fireflies, you keep the court running. You keep the letters going. You keep the family intact. You even survive smallpox, a disease that leaves your face marked, but your presence untouched. Some courtiers whisper behind fans. But most are too afraid, or too in awe, to say anything directly. You are a survivor in a world that devours queens before dessert. And when you die in 1547, far too young at 43, the grief is real. Ferdinand mourns you not just as his wife, but as his anchor. He wears black for months. He retreats from the court. He even refuses to remarry. For a Habsburg male, that's practically sainthood. One quirky architectural tribute, Ferdinand builds you a tomb so elaborate that visitors mistake it for a chapel. Inside, a Latin inscription praises your intellect, your piety, and your remarkable fertility, a phrase which, while not exactly romantic, does capture the dynasty's deepest priority. Your legacy is threaded through Europe like golden stitching. Your children rule kingdoms. Your grandchildren marry into every remaining Catholic throne. Your blood, diluted just enough to avoid further mandibular mishaps, flows through half the continent. You are the midwife of modern Habsburg power. Not by command, but by presence. By survival. By knowing when to speak and when to nod just enough to get your way. And of Bohemia and Hungary. Mother of kings. Cousin wife of emperors. And somehow, in all that madness, still your own woman. You're standing now at the edge of a crowded Neapolitan court, where the gold is real, the daggers are hidden, and the candles drip like time itself. The year is 1326, and your name is Joanna of Naples, also known, depending on who's telling the story, as Joanna I of Anjou. Your life. A high-stakes melodrama scripted by cousins, assassins, and popes. You were born into the House of Anjou, a cadet branch of the French Capetians, strategically planted in southern Italy like a royal olive tree. From the moment you're born, your destiny is sealed, you are to be queen. But as you'll soon discover, queens are less adored than they are owned. Your childhood is a blur of Latin lessons, cathedral shadows, and whispered conversations about your future. The crown of Naples is yours by right, but only if you marry strategically, and, of course, within the family. Your first husband. Andrew of Hungary, your cousin. Surprise. His family wants the throne just as badly as yours. The match is arranged when you're still practically a child. It's not a love story, it's a hostage exchange disguised as a wedding. Historians still debate whether Andrew was inept or merely in the wrong place at the wrong time. Either way, things go south fast. Andrew wants to be crowned king in his own right. Your court, more Neapolitan than Magyar, says absolutely not. It's your throne. He's just decorative. Tensions rise. Paranoia thickens. And in 1345, while visiting a royal hunting lodge, Andrew is murdered, strangled with a curtain cord and tossed from a balcony. It's the kind of exit that would make Shakespeare blush. You deny involvement, of course. Publicly. Calmly. But the rumor mill howls. Was it your hand? Your order? Your chamberlain? Your mother-in-law's maid's lover's brother? No one can prove it. Which means everyone assumes it's true. Quirky detail, the Pope, horrified by the scandal, sends investigators who discover, wait for it, a dog paw print in the dried blood. The Middle Ages, ladies and gentlemen. A time when even the crime scenes had ambience. The fallout is immense. The Hungarian army invades Naples to avenge Andrew's death. You flee. You return. You flee again. You marry again, this time to Louis of Taranto, another cousin. You'd think your gene pool would at least offer a few strangers by now, but no. Royal matchmaking remains aggressively vertical. Through all this, you keep the crown. That's the marvel. In a world where kings rule and queens smile quietly from balconies, you rule Naples for over 3 decades. You issue edicts. Lead armies. Fund monasteries. And yes, make enemies faster than you can light another devotional candle. Historians still argue whether you were a savvy monarch or a political arsonist. Your supporters call you bold. Your critics call you cursed. Either way, you outlast them. Mostly. There's also that whole papal drama. When the Great Western Schism divides the Catholic Church, you choose to back the Avignon Pope over the Roman one. This doesn't go over well. In 1380, the Pope in Rome declares you deposed and backs your distant cousin, Charles of Durazzo, to replace you. And when a man named Charles arrives at your gates with an army, it's not a house call. This Charles isn't just ambitious, he's methodical. He invades Naples, captures you, imprisons you in a castle far from the sea. And in 1382, you are strangled, some say with a silken cord, others with a strip of royal bedding. You die not with a crown, but with a whisper. But here's the twist, your legacy refuses to stay dead. Your court was one of the most vibrant cultural centers in Europe. Poets, scholars, and artists flourished under your patronage. You supported Petrarch and funded hospitals, convents, and charities. You reformed legal codes and reinforced civil institutions that long outlived your reign. And unlike many queens of your time, you ruled not through a husband, but in spite of them. One quirky legend, after your death, your supporters claim your ghost wanders the halls of Castel dell'Ovo during storms, wrapped in a crimson mantle, whispering political secrets to the wind. Probably nonsense. But it speaks to your impact. People couldn't let you go. Even now, you're a historical contradiction. A ruler framed for murder yet beloved by her people. A queen who lost everything and still made history. You were the storm in the Mediterranean, graceful, volatile, unforgettable. Joanna of Naples. Last of her line. First of her kind. You find yourself now in the heart of Spain's imperial golden age, surrounded by thick velvet tapestries, candles flickering in heavy chandeliers, and guards who seem to whisper in Latin just to sound more intimidating. It's the year 1566, and you are Isabella Clara Eugenia, a name that sounds like an entire royal family tree compressed into one breath. And frankly, it might as well be. Your father, Philip II of Spain, master of half the known world. Your mother, Elizabeth of Valois, a French princess with more polished etiquette than most entire courts. The catch? They're also cousins. At this point, the Habsburgs aren't so much marrying into power as they are marinating in it. So naturally, you arrive into this world not just as a royal daughter, but as a future political tool, sharpened for diplomacy and poised for a lifetime of strategic sacrifice. From the moment you can sit upright, you're being groomed, not just to marry, but to govern. Your tutors teach you Latin, theology, court protocol, military logistics, and family trees dense enough to make your brain ache. Historians still argue whether your education was unusually advanced for a woman of your time, or simply typical for someone born into the most dangerously powerful and spectacularly inbred dynasty in Europe. Either way, you absorb it all. And then, you wait. You are proposed to dozens of times, by kings, dukes, cousins, and at least one guy who may have just been a very confident marquis. But nothing sticks. Partly because your father won't let you go. Partly because, he's saving you for a very specific future. That future. The Spanish Netherlands, a powder keg of rebellion, Protestant uprisings, and economic turmoil. A nightmare wrapped in tulips. So, in 1598, on the day of your father's abdication, he grants you an unusual gift, joint sovereignty over the Netherlands, with your new husband and cousin, naturally, Archduke Albert VII of Austria. It's a political marriage, yes. But here's the shocker, it actually works. Albert respects you. He listens. He doesn't treat you like a porcelain political trinket. Together, you co-rule like partners. While he manages the battlefield, you manage the cities. You govern from Brussels, signing edicts, managing trade routes, and enforcing Catholic reforms. One quirky historical detail, you personally supervised theatrical productions at court, helping with costume designs and casting decisions. You weren't just ruling, you were also producing the royal entertainment calendar like some 16th century executive director. Your marriage becomes a model of decorum and dignity. You and Albert even exchanged love letters, genuine ones, remarkable for a union built more in chancelleries than chapels. But all good things wobble. Albert dies in 1621. You are 55 and childless. A lesser figure might have retreated to a cloister or melted into court embroidery. Not you. You petition the Spanish crown to remain as governess of the Netherlands, and they agree. Because no one else can do it better. Historians still debate the extent of your independent power during this period. Some argue you were micromanaged from Madrid. Others insist you were the final word on Flemish governance. What is clear? You kept the region afloat during a time of religious fragmentation and civil unrest. You also maintained diplomatic ties with France and England, managed military provisioning during the 30 Years' War, and funded Catholic charities even as taxes drained the treasury. Your court became a center of arts and learning, attracting the likes of Peter Paul Rubens, who painted multiple portraits of you that somehow managed to convey both royalty and real emotion. And let's not forget, you oversaw colonial correspondence too. Even in the Americas and the Philippines, reports bore your name and seal. You were as international as a woman could be in an era that barely let women sign their own wills. One lesser-known fact. You once banned the public sale of live parrots in Brussels after one bit a courtier's finger clean off. File that under Reasons Isabella is relatable. You die in 1633, at age 66. Your funeral lasts 3 days. Entire provinces declare periods of mourning. Rubens paints you one last time, this time in black, shrouded in velvet, a figure more ghost than queen. But you're not forgotten. You are remembered as the calm between two storms, the soul who held the Netherlands together while empires shifted and Europe bled. You didn't just rule. You tempered. Isabella Clara Eugenia. Archduchess. Regent. Collector of titles and stabilizer of chaos. You may have been born from a family obsessed with bloodlines, but you ruled like someone who actually understood them. Now you're standing in the frosted shadow of the Burgundian court, where silk rustles like wind through trees and candles flicker over polished suits of armor. The air smells faintly of beeswax, parchment, and cold ambition. You are Mary of Burgundy, born in 1457, the only child of Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, and the last hope of a glittering but crumbling empire. Your father. A man who tried to play king with a duchy, riding out in full armor while the actual crowned heads of Europe shook theirs. He dreams of an independent Burgundian kingdom, wedged between France and the Holy Roman Empire like a very rich, very well-dressed splinter. But dreams don't pay for wars, and Charles dies in battle at Nancy in 1477, his body found frozen, face down in the snow. You are 19, and suddenly the sole heir to one of the richest and most unstable regions in Europe. Which means, overnight, you become the most marriageable woman on earth. Kings, emperors, cousins, you name it, they all come sniffing. And yet, in a move both romantic and ruthlessly political, you choose Maximilian of Austria, future Holy Roman Emperor, and your second cousin once removed. Of course. Because if there's one thing Europe loves, it's mixing love and recessive genes. Historians still argue whether this was a love match or a chess move. Maybe it was both. You needed support to keep France from swallowing Burgundy whole, and Maximilian, young, ambitious, well-connected, needed you for money, land, and dynastic weight. The match works. Mostly. You marry in Ghent under torchlight, a city that immediately begins calling you Our Lady Mary, a title half adoration, half insurance policy. You ride through the streets on horseback, draped in crimson velvet, waving with the confidence of someone who doesn't yet realize how many knives are behind the curtains. Because the Burgundian court? It's a circus. You're barely in the saddle when the nobility starts testing your limits. They don't like Austrians. They don't like Maximilian. They don't really like you either, but you're less threatening, so they tolerate you. For now. You hold councils. Issue proclamations. Stabilize the court just enough to buy time. You also start consolidating regional privileges through the Great Privilege of 1477, a sweeping constitutional reform that grants rights to towns and cities across your territory. It's political genius or political surrender, depending on who you ask. A quirky tidbit: one chronicler notes that you used to ride falcons for stress relief, cutting across the lowlands on horseback like a queen pretending to be wild. You have children. 2, in fact. One of them is Philip the Handsome, future father of Charles V, the man who will one day rule an empire so vast the sun literally never sets on it. You don't live to see that. But the bloodline you leave behind? It soaks the 16th century like wine on linen. And then, disaster. In 1482, while out riding, your horse stumbles. You're thrown violently to the ground. Some say it's raining. Others say it's the clearest day of spring. Doesn't matter. Your back is broken. You live for several days in excruciating pain, conscious, attended by weeping courtiers and frantic physicians who can do nothing but apply ointments and pray. You write a final will, urging the nobles to honor your children's inheritance and protect Burgundy from French encroachment. Historians still debate the accident. Was it sabotage? An act of God? A tragic irony, given how many enemies you danced around with such precision. Whatever the cause, it ends your story at just 25 years old. But what a story it is. Your death sends shockwaves through Europe. The Burgundian court splits, the cities grumble, and Maximilian, devastated and politically cornered, spends the next decade fighting to keep your legacy intact. He becomes regent for your son, clashing with rebellious towns, nobles, and the ever-opportunistic French crown. One of your final legacies. The permanent fusion of Burgundian wealth with Habsburg ambition. Your marriage to Maximilian sets off a domino effect that reconfigures European power for generations. Without you, there's no Charles V, no Spanish Netherlands, no sprawling Habsburg dominance. You were the hinge. And still, in Ghent, they remember you. Streets bear your name. Statues rise in town squares. You weren't just a duchess, you were a national symbol. Not because you ruled long, but because you ruled well in a world that expected you to fail. One last quirky note: the falcon you favored most reportedly returned to your estate weeks after your death, circling the gardens for days before disappearing. Some say it was instinct. Others say loyalty. You'd probably say it was both, and then get back to work. Mary of Burgundy. Rider of falcons. Breaker of dynasties. Quiet fire in a silk dress. You're sitting now in the glittering, chilly salons of 18th century Vienna, where powdered wigs reign supreme, court gossip is as dangerous as espionage, and the chandeliers drip with both light and political intrigue. You are Maria Theresa of Austria, empress by necessity, strategist by birthright, and mother by sheer determination, a woman who would carry not only a crown but a family tree so interwoven, it might as well be a knot. You're born in 1717, into the house of Habsburg, naturally. Your father is Emperor Charles VI, a man so obsessed with keeping power in the family that he rewrites European law to make sure you, his daughter, can inherit the throne. This document becomes known as the Pragmatic Sanction, and let's just say, not everyone claps. Historians still debate whether Charles truly prepared you to rule, or simply hoped the paperwork would do the heavy lifting. Because when he dies in 1740, and you ascend at 23, the wolves come running: France, Prussia, Bavaria. They smell blood, or at least, a young woman with a very fragile legal claim. And yet, you don't buckle. You lead. You mobilize. You marry your second cousin, naturally, Francis Stephen of Lorraine, a man you love deeply, and who adores you back. It's that rarest of royal combinations, political alliance and genuine affection. You rule together, though make no mistake, you are the center of gravity. He's there to support you, not define you. You have children. Many, many children. 16 in total. That's not an exaggeration, that's a logistical miracle. One of them is Marie Antoinette, the ill-fated Queen of France. Another is Joseph II, who will inherit the imperial crown. Your family isn't just large, it's strategically distributed, married off across Europe like chess pieces blessed by God and cursed by bloodlines. One quirky detail. You're famously strict with your children, writing long letters full of moral advice and political expectation. If your child tried to marry for love or refused a dynastic match, you'd respond with the royal equivalent of, "Not under my empire, young lady." Back at court, you're not just raising babies, you're remaking the monarchy. You streamline tax collection, reform the military, and centralize administration across the Habsburg lands. You even establish mandatory primary education, making you one of the earliest advocates for literacy in your realm. But this isn't out of pure benevolence, it's about statecraft. Smarter peasants make better taxpayers and more obedient subjects. Historians still argue over your stance on religious tolerance. On the one hand, you support the Jesuits and enforce strict Catholic orthodoxy. On the other, you crack down on witch trials and show flashes of modernity. You're a paradox, a deeply pious woman who still retools the machinery of empire with clinical precision. And when your beloved husband dies in 1765, you wear black for the rest of your life. You never remarry. You withdraw from some ceremonial duties, but you do not stop ruling. You shift the public-facing duties to your son, Joseph II, but you remain the brain behind the crown, the voice in the shadows, the empress in all but name. A little-known anecdote. You refuse to let court musicians perform anything too cheerful for years after Francis's death. The harpsichords had to mourn with you. It's both tragic and iconic. You rule for 40 years, overseeing a world that shifts beneath your feet, industrialization, Enlightenment philosophy, and growing whispers of revolution from the West. You try to keep it all stitched together, though the seams begin to pull. And still, you endure. You're not beloved by all, some saw you as autocratic, others as too sentimental. But you were undeniably effective. In an age that doubted women could do more than bear airs and look elegant in silk, you became the matriarch of an empire. A builder, a fighter, a mother who kept the crown not only polished, but populated. The Habsburg dynasty may have been built on cousin marriages and dynastic spreadsheets, but under your rule, it became something more, a machine of survival, held together by policy, faith, and formidable parenting. One final curious note. After your death in 1780, your body was placed in the imperial crypt in Vienna. Surrounding your tomb are those of your husband, your favorite children, and your least favorite politicians. Yes, really. The Habsburgs planned eternity as tightly as they planned inheritance. Maria Theresa. Empress of 10 crowns. Mother of 16. Builder of schools, armies, and legacies. And possibly the only ruler in history whose diplomatic strategy involved both canon law and potty training. You're gliding now through the velvet corridors of medieval France, and all around you the sound of rustling silk mixes with the hissing friction of politics disguised as prayer. The torches spit in iron sconces, casting shadows on ancient stone walls. You are Yolande of Aragon, born in 1381, a princess, a duchess, a military financier, and, if you're paying close attention, one of the most quietly powerful women of the 100 Years' War. At birth, you are what every court dreams of, a dynastic jackpot. Your father, John I of Aragon, is a king, your mother, Yolande of Bar, ties you to the French royal family. Your bloodline is a tangled ribbon of Capetian ambition, Iberian fire, and more cousins than a Habsburg family photo. Naturally, your future is written before you can speak. You're married off to Louis II of Anjou, a man with as many titles as enemies. It's a union thick with potential, because through him, you become Duchess of Anjou, Countess of Provence, Queen of Naples in theory, and mother of a future king. The wedding is celebratory, sure, but it's also strategic, because your children will hold the keys to both France and the Italian South, provided you can navigate a battlefield of daggers, debt, and dynasties. And that's where you shine. Because while Louis plays king in Naples, often losing more battles than he wins, you're back in France running the finances, negotiating with noble houses, and making sure your children aren't overthrown by whichever cousin is currently claiming divine right. One quirky detail, during her years managing court affairs, Yolande personally employed a court alchemist, a man tasked with turning base metals into gold and, more importantly, with inventing plausible medicinal excuses when her husband failed to attend royal obligations. Yes, medieval spin doctoring with potions and flair. You raise a brood of children with terrifying efficiency. Your daughter, Marie of Anjou, marries Charles VII of France, and that's where your influence becomes legend. Because Charles, timid, pious, indecisive, is nowhere near prepared to reclaim France from the English. And yet, he does. But not alone. And here's the kicker, Yolande is one of the very first people to believe in Joan of Arc. Historians still debate whether it was political savvy, spiritual conviction, or a calculated gamble, but what is clear is that you support Joan, financially, militarily, and strategically. While men at court whisper about demons and madness, you see opportunity. You vet her. You clothe her. You send her to Charles's court dressed like a dignitary, not a peasant. And the rest, well, you know the tale of the Maid of Orleans. But few know your name was behind her banner. You fund armies. You whisper into the ears of bishops. You manage land disputes and bribe allies. You play French politics like a chessboard with a ticking clock. When Charles finally ascends the throne, it's not just because of Joan's visions, it's because you paved the road, brick by painful brick. One lesser-known fact. During a particularly tense series of negotiations, you reportedly locked 3 barons in a wine cellar until they agreed on a marriage alliance. It worked. No one complained. One even emerged drunk enough to offer to finance a cathedral. When Louis II dies, you don't retreat into mourning. You don't vanish into the pages of a psalter. You take up governance of Anjou and Provence in your son's name. You oversee taxes, trade routes, and local disputes. You arbitrate between warring vassals. You run it better than half the dukes in Europe, and with considerably more grace. Historians still argue over just how influential you were behind the scenes. Some suggest you were the true regent of France for a decade. Others tone it down to informal advisor. But everyone agrees, without you, Charles VII would never have survived, let alone ruled. One curious anecdote: your library was said to be one of the largest personal collections of any woman in Europe at the time. It included books on medicine, agriculture, astrology, and siege warfare. A duchess with a reading list fit for both healer and conqueror. You die in 1442, at the age of 61, after outliving nearly every man who ever doubted you. Your funeral procession stretches for miles. Charles VII himself weeps. You are remembered in Anjou and Provence not just as a consort or queen by marriage, but as a mother of a kingdom. Your descendants go on to shape France and Italy. And your legacy, subtle, intelligent, quietly radical, echoes every time a woman in power moves a kingdom without raising her voice. Yolande of Aragon. Warrior in silk. Patron of saints and schemers. Queen of shadows and mother of France. You didn't lead armies on horseback, but you chose who did. You didn't wear a crown, but the weight of one pressed your every thought. And while Joan heard voices from heaven, you made sure her feet had a road to walk on. You're slipping now into the court of the Netherlands, where fog rolls in from the lowlands and the wind smells like sea salt, ink, and fresh paper. You are Margaret of Austria, born in 1480 to Maximilian I and Mary of Burgundy, yes, that Mary, the falcon rider whose fall cracked the dynastic mirror of Europe. Which means you inherit not just titles and trauma, but also a sense of duty that might as well be stitched into your blood. From the beginning, your life is shaped by treaties, ships, and sudden reversals. At just 3 years old, you're engaged to the French crown prince and sent to be raised at the French court like a royal houseplant in enemy territory. The marriage never happens. France breaks off the betrothal, and you're returned to your father like a high-value package with no return policy. Historians still argue whether this political rejection left a scar or a steely resolve. What we do know is that you never remarry after your second widowhood, a rare thing in a world where noblewomen were expected to be walking alliance agreements until their last breath. You marry twice. First, to John, Prince of Asturias, heir to the Spanish kingdoms. He dies 6 months in, and you're left a teenage widow in a foreign land. Then to Philibert of Savoy, who also dies young. After that, you say, no more. And you mean it. Instead of a third husband, you choose statecraft. Which, let's be honest, is harder to manage than any man. You're appointed governor of the Netherlands by your nephew, Charles V, who already trusts your political mind more than half his council. And you deliver. You rule from Mechlin, overseeing trade, taxes, treaties, and education. You're not a figurehead, you're Europe's most competent aunt, a master of negotiation with a killer art collection and the willpower of a mountain. A quirky detail. You commission portraits of exotic animals, giraffes, elephants, monkeys, that you'll never see in person, but whose presence in your halls says, this court thinks globally. And while the lowlands boil with religious tensions and noble rivalries, you keep the peace, not with armies, but with clever marriages, ironclad treaties, and timely pardons. You're fluent in 6 languages, and you're said to be able to spot a false treaty clause faster than most lawyers today. Your household becomes a training ground for royals. Among them, a young Anne Boleyn, sent here to polish her courtly manners before her eventual plunge into Tudor madness. She watches how you run a court, how you wield power without raising your voice. And one wonders, how much of Margaret ended up in Anne's cool defiance. Historians still debate just how, behind the scenes, your power truly was. Some call you a regent, others a de facto ruler. But everyone agrees, you held the Habsburg Netherlands together in a time when it should have crumbled like a stale biscuit. You negotiate directly with kings and popes. You send envoys, balance war budgets, and conduct meetings where your only armor is a perfectly balanced sentence and a glance that says, I've already read the footnotes. And perhaps your most lasting legacy? The Treaty of Cambrai, aka the Ladies' Peace, negotiated between you and Louise of Savoy, another powerful woman acting on behalf of a son. 2 women drawing the borders of Europe while the men play soldier. It's not often that diplomacy is conducted in silk gloves, but you make it look easy. Your court becomes a hub for art and intellect. You fund tapestries, paintings, architecture. You support music theorists and theologians, and your taste leans toward the contemplative, the poised, art that whispers instead of shouts. And yet, your personal life remains colored by grief. You lose your mother at 2. Your husbands die young. You're denied a throne of your own, again and again. But you build power from those ashes. Your control isn't thunder, it's pressure applied slowly over time, like water wearing away stone. One strange fact. You're buried in Brou, in a church you designed yourself, down to the color of the marble and the script on your tomb. No detail escaped your eye, even in death. You lie next to Philibert, the husband you actually liked. It's a monument not to royalty, but to clarity. You chose how you'd be remembered. Margaret of Austria. Twice a bride, once a ruler, forever a thread in the Habsburg tapestry. No crown ever rested on your head, but empires were stitched into the folds of your gowns. You weren't loud. You didn't need to be. Power moved when you did. And in the hush of your council chambers, history paused, then shifted. You're traveling now through the perfumed halls of late Renaissance France, where candles flicker in silver sconces and the scent of clove oranges and old ink haunts the velvet-draped corridors. Here, politics and poison often share the same cup. You are Catherine de' Medici, Italian by birth, French by marriage, and the steel spine behind 3 kings. Born in 1519 in Florence to Lorenzo de' Medici, you begin life as political collateral. Orphaned within weeks, raised in convents, and then, at 14, married off to Henry, Duke of Orleans, the future Henry II of France. You bring an enormous dowry and a legendary surname, but that's about it. Everyone, including Henry's mistress Diane de Poitiers, dismisses you as the banker's daughter. Historians still argue whether your early years in France were humiliating or quietly strategic. But one thing is certain, you learn to watch. You observe the scheming, the betrayals, the court rituals, and you absorb it all, like velvet soaking up spilled wine. And when Henry dies unexpectedly in 1559 from a jousting accident, yes, a splinter to the eye, because medieval medicine was still just vibes, you step into a role no one expected you to fill, Queen Mother and unofficial ruler. Your son Francis too is just 15 when he inherits the throne. Sickly, married to Mary, Queen of Scots, and entirely under the thumb of the Guise family. But when he dies after just 17 months, your second son, Charles IX, becomes king at age 10. That's when you take over. You're not crowned, but you hold more power than most kings. You sit at council meetings. You dictate foreign policy. You sign edicts. And in an era when being a powerful woman was about as safe as juggling lit torches while blindfolded, you managed to survive. One quirky detail. You bring perfume and ballet to the French court. Under your influence, the royal palaces smell better and move more gracefully, even as they implode politically. But behind the satin and the scented gloves, you're constantly putting out fires, or setting them. The religious wars between Catholics and Huguenots are ripping France in half. You try to balance both sides, sometimes too carefully. You propose toleration, then backtrack. You marry your daughter Marguerite to a Protestant, then oversee what becomes one of the most infamous events in French history. St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, 1572. Thousands of Protestants are slaughtered in Paris days after your daughter's wedding. Did you order it? Approve it? Try to stop it? Historians still argue. Some say you orchestrated it. Others believe you tried to prevent it and lost control. What's clear is that your name becomes synonymous with blood, and your political reputation never recovers. But you don't stop. You serve as regent for Henry III, your third son to wear the crown. He's vain, unpredictable, and possibly more interested in fashion than foreign affairs. But you manage him too. You write hundreds of letters, some coaxing, some scolding, all clever. And yet, you're constantly haunted by one simple truth: your enemies never rest. The Guise family wants power. Spain wants influence. The Protestants want safety. And the people? They want food, order, and preferably, fewer massacres. One fringe tidbit. You keep astrologers at court, including the famous Nostradamus, whose cryptic predictions you reportedly use to time political decisions. It's less about magic, more about plausible deniability. It wasn't me, the stars said so. You're blamed for everything: heresy, tyranny, witchcraft, infertility, incest. If a crop fails, it's your fault. If a comet appears, you're behind it. You're the original scapegoat queen, poised, educated, relentless. Still, you build. You sponsor art, architecture, and urban design. You turn Tuileries Palace into a royal home. You create gardens and libraries, patronize scholars, and push the boundaries of female political participation. But always in the shadows, always through sons and husbands and whispered decrees. Historians still debate your legacy. Was Catherine a Machiavellian villainess, willing to drown France in blood to preserve her power? Or was she a survivor, doing what she had to in a world that never made room for women with ambition? One thing is clear: without Catherine, the Valois line would have collapsed decades sooner. She buys them time, not with war, but with marriages, compromises, and the occasional calculated atrocity. And through it all, you never apologize. You know the stakes. You know the whispers. And you know that when men fail, they die heroes. But when women survive, they're called monsters. Catherine de' Medici. Queen of France, mother of kings, master of the long game. You die in 1589, aged 69, just months before your last son is assassinated. With your death, the Valois dynasty ends, and the Bourbons rise. Your tomb sits in the Basilica of Saint Denis, among kings. But your real monument is the fragile century of order you managed to drag out of chaos. No crown for your head, but France, bloody, burning, beautiful, was yours to hold, for a while. Now the fog thickens, and time slows like honey dripping from an ancient spoon. You're drifting across sunken courtyards, past toppled pillars and stone lips whispering lost names. What you've reached is not a throne room or a battlefield, but the drowned bones of a forgotten empire. This is Heracleion, also known as Thonis, once a bustling Egyptian port city, now sleeping beneath the Mediterranean Sea. And yes, you're still on the trail of inbred queens and royal oddities, but history, like a good dream, doesn't always travel in a straight line. Sometimes it meanders, like a river that once fed a city now vanished. Heracleion was once Egypt's gateway to the Mediterranean, centuries before Alexandria rose to fame. Ships from Greece, Phoenicia, and beyond would dock here, pay taxes at its grand customs house, and unload goods, gods, and gossip. This was no dusty village, it was a sacred and economic hub, filled with towering temples, colossal statues, and ceremonial harbors carved into the Nile Delta. You walk its underwater streets now, guided by torchlight that doesn't flicker. You pass a temple to Ammonius Jerub, where pharaohs once knelt in coronation rituals. You see marketplaces where fishmongers traded Nile perch for purple dye and priests sold amulets against bad dreams. The scale is staggering, massive stele etched in both Greek and hieroglyphic script, offering legal proof that Heracleion and Thonis were the same city. One quirky fact. Heracleion housed a floating festival, where the sacred bark of Osiris was paraded across canals. Imagine a sacred boat, pulled through a city of incense and song, sort of a mystical Mardi Gras on water. But Heracleion wasn't just spiritual. It was rich. Fish, spices, wine, linen, ivory, slaves, and scrolls passed through its docks. And its downfall wasn't a war, it was water. The sea crept in slowly, the earth beneath it liquefied, and one day the city sank. No dramatic exodus. Just silence and salt. Historians still argue why no one did more to stop it. Was it denial? Bad engineering? A simple refusal to believe that greatness could drown? For centuries, Heracleion became legend. A whisper in Greek texts. A ghost name on Roman charts. Then, in 2000, underwater archaeologists led by Frank Gaudio finally found it. Over 70 shipwrecks. Hundreds of statues. Jewelry, coins, and ceremonial objects, all preserved by the ocean like a hoarder of history. You might wonder, why end a story about queens and inbreeding with a city beneath the sea? Because Heracleion, just like the women you've met, was shaped by dynasties, sunk by ambition, and rediscovered with reverence. It was ruled by men who married their sisters, worshipped gods of fertility, and believed sleep could connect you to the divine. In Heracleion, a queen could be both priestess and property, and power was always slippery, salt water through your fingers. And that's what this entire journey has been, hasn't it? You've wandered through the haunted corridors of Europe's royal past. You've met women born of cousins and wed to uncles. Women who ruled without thrones, governed without swords, and endured the strangest of fates with grace, grief, and grit. You saw queens who were diplomats, spymasters, regents, and scapegoats. Their DNA may have looped like a tangled braid, but their minds were sharp enough to slice through centuries. Their lives weren't fairy tales. They were algebraic puzzles of politics and blood, played out in candlelight and chronicled by biased monks. And yet, they endured. They schemed, ruled, mourned, outlived everyone who tried to erase them. They were tragic. They were powerful. And they were, in their own strange way, immortal. Just like Heraclean, their legacies sleep beneath layers of myth and mud, waiting for someone to dig carefully, lovingly, and say, "This mattered. This was real." And now, as your breath deepens and your limbs grow heavy, we leave them where we found them, half remembered, half revered. Let their stories sink gently into your dreams like sunken cities, ancient teeth, and half-burnt scrolls wrapped in velvet. The sea has kept them safe. And so shall we. So now, as your eyelids flutter toward stillness, let your thoughts unspool like silk ribbons drifting in warm water. Let the names you've just traveled with, Catherine, Joanna, Margaret, Heraclean, drift away into the quiet. No need to hold on to the timelines or the family trees anymore. Let them dissolve, softly, like ink in sleep. The candles are out now. The palaces are silent. The sea has reclaimed the ruins. And you? You're safe beneath your blanket of stars, held by the hush of distant waves and forgotten prayers. The voices have faded into lullabies. No battles left to fight. No treaties left to sign. Just a gentle awareness that history, for all its harshness, still carries a pulse, a rhythm, meant to soothe. Let your breath slow to match that rhythm. In and out. In and out. Like tides, like pages turning. Let your dreams find those corridors of old stone and honeyed dust, where empires once whispered secrets to queens. Let sleep wrap around you like a velvet cloak, warm, worn, and deeply familiar. You've wandered long tonight. You've stood in courts, knelt at altars, drifted through catacombs and kissed the salt of long-dead seas. Now, it's time to return. You've earned your rest. Sleep well, traveler.